Welcome to AP Biology at Colony High. Today's lesson is Themes of Biology, our very first lecture of the year. We start off with the study of life. So, one thing I want you guys to realize is that when we learn AP Biology, we're learning these great big umbrella concepts because there are a lot of great big ideas and recurring principles that we'll see time and time again. So, one way when you look at AP Bio and all the content that we have, is that to kind of clump them under these umbrellas here. There's just too much to learn all at once. So I wouldn't worry about knowing all the details and all the specifics. It's just too big a field. Generalizing the information that we learn in AP Bio makes it pretty easy to build a framework which we can then scaffold and build new knowledge upon. So there are four really big themes or four big ideas that I want you guys to try to relate, answering all the questions you have for bio about. So here we are with, I think, the pretty much most important big idea. It's a process of evolution. And from the College Board curriculum, the process of evolution drives the unity and diversity of life. And one thing I want you to realize is that all life on the planet is related. Whether you're a bear, you're a coneflower, you're a monarch butterfly, any of these birds, a snake, a spider, you name it, we're all related. And you can see here, this is just one type of tree that is built that's showing how each kind of life form, the properties they have, and kind of where they came from, because we all do have one common ancestor. This is a phylogenetic tree, one that you're going to see a lot when we get to evolution later on in the year. And this phylogenetic tree shows the evolutionary relationships of all life. When you guys were back in living environment as freshmen, you might have learned about the Linnaean system of classification. You know, the big old kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And as you go through these layers here, you're getting more and more specific. Well, that's kind of outdated, as we'll see when we look at the molecular evidence later on. The phylogenetic tree is a bit more precise with it. And you might think us, Homo sapiens, human beings, are the top of the mountain, the tip of the iceberg, the highest point of evolution. Well, in actuality, when you look at where we are on this, we're kind of right about here, at the tip of this animal kind of branch, pretty much closely related to fungi and slime molds. We're not that much different than all these other species here, where there's other great branches as well. We'll see that later on in the year when we get to evolution. But a big recurring principle under the evolution big idea is a great quote of mine, I like to use from Theodosius Dobzhansky. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. This is huge. Hopefully you remember from your biology days, the man, Charles Darwin, Chuck D himself. He was the first to really kind of wrap his brain around this concept of evolution by natural selection. And his theories still hold water today. And trust me, people have been trying to disprove him since the 1850s. But the evidence that we're gathering really supports the idea of natural selection. Not to go into it in a lot of detail now, but it pretty much means that those best adapted to the environment have the best chance to survive. So this is a great way to look at how all life is related, because we do come from that common ancestor, but we don't all live in the same environments. Take an example here. You have all these different kinds of insects or beetles, and they're on a dark background. And you see in the very beginning here, we have a population that's kind of a bit varied in their phenotypes. Well, if we take a look, here comes Mr. Bird, who's a little bit hungry here, and over time we notice that certain traits that certain individuals possess are not beneficial. It's actually detrimental. In this case, if you are a lighter colored bug, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to survive that bird coming for feeding. So what happens is, after this selection event, you're going to have survivors that are less light or more dark or more blended into this environment. And over time, as these selection pressures occur, not just by birds eating bugs, but as various environmental changes take place, you're going to have a slowly evolving population. Now, I shouldn't always say slowly, because you can actually see natural selection take place under controlled circumstances in a really short amount of time. Here, take a look at this really cool demonstration of natural selection.
So what we ended up building was basically a petri dish, except that it's 2 feet by 4 feet. And the way we set it up is that there are 9 bands, and at the base of each of these bands, we put a normal petri dish thick agar with different amounts of antibiotic. On the outside, there's no antibiotic. Just in from that, there's barely more than the E. coli can survive. Inside of that, there's 10 times as much, 100 times, and then finally the middle band has 1,000 times as much antibiotic. And then across the top of it, pour some thin agar that bacteria can move around in.
In case you didn't know, the agar, or agar, is the material, the medium that bacteria grow on. So they're making a giant petri dish. If you take mold bio, you're going to do these a lot.
The background is black because there's ink in it, and the bacteria appear as white. First, you see they spread in the area where there's no antibiotic, up until the point they can no longer survive. Then a mutant appears on the right. It's resistant to the antibiotic, it spreads, until it starts to compete with other mutants around it. When these mutants hit the next boundary, they too have to pause and develop new mutations to make it into 10 times as much antibiotic. And then you see the different mutants repeat this at 100. And after about 11 days, they finally make it into 1,000 times as much antibiotic as the wild type can survive. And so we can see by this process of accumulating successive mutations that bacteria, which are normally sensitive to an antibiotic, can evolve resistance to extremely high concentrations in a short period of time.
That really crucial point there. I'm going to back up just so you see that phylogenetic tree they drew of this agar plate. What happens is as they grow, bacteria are reproducing and their DNA gets copied. And when DNA is copied, sometimes mistakes are made and they can result in mutations. So they weren't able to survive the antibiotic, but some developed a mutation in one of many genes perhaps that enabled them to survive, and they started to grow. And the same thing takes place. And we're looking at this ability to grow in 1,000 times the antibiotic in this middle region. That is well above most likely the lethal dose for this particular bacteria. But we're watching this natural selection event take place. In this case, what's doing the selecting is the antibiotics that's on the plate. And as you can see, after just 11 days, these bacteria were able to thrive in antibiotics that are way stronger than they should be able to survive. And that's just 11 days, folks. Imagine what billions of years can do to a life form. And that's one thing I want you to kind of hopefully understand a little bit. Evolution is a driving force of all life. So one of the big questions is looking at unity versus diversity. It's these dual aspects of life. You know, what do living things have in common? Whether you're an animal, a plant, a fungi, an amoeba, why do these similarities exist? And as for diversity, why are these animals so different if they have unity? And why do these differences exist? These are some pretty awesome questions, and I encourage you guys to discuss that further, you know, hanging out when you're able to try to get to the bottom of it. But I will say, one of the things that drives all this is the natural selection from a common ancestor. Okay, we are all related. All living things are related. And as we kind of move to different niches, different environments, some of these variations that we've accumulated via mutation and recombination might be beneficial in some environments. In some places they might not. That's what natural selection is all about, and trust me, we'll spend a lot of time talking about that later in the year. The second big idea, biological systems utilize free energy and molecular building blocks to grow, reproduce, and to maintain dynamic homeostasis. In case you forgot homeostasis, it's the condition of internal balance. And living things have to utilize energy to maintain that. So when we get to the Unit 3 or so, we talk about cellular energetics. We talk about how life is an open system and that we're constantly interacting with the environment. Like it says, stuff comes in, stuff goes out. All the while, energy is used to maintain order. If you remember your chemistry, entropy is a really powerful force. It's that all matter, all systems are leading towards disorder. And it takes energy to maintain order. And living things are highly organized systems. So energy transfer is a big part of living systems, whether you're a photosynthetic plant using the energy from sunlight to weave together inorganic compounds to make glucose, for example, whether you're a carnivore with a parasite like a mosquito or a heterotroph, a parasite like a mosquito or a carnivore like a cheetah over here, or a herbivore like Mr. Koala Bear, you have to kind of obtain materials to get the energy from them. Either way, you're converting energy from one form, light, organic molecules, to form something else. And this carries out through all different levels of an organism. What starts as, here, a molecule of chlorophyll with the atom of magnesium in the reaction center, which we find in the organelle of a chloroplast, which we find in the basic unit of life, a cell, leading towards many cells working together like the palisade layer or spongy layer in a leaf cross-section. Those are tissues in the overall organ of a leaf. And once we keep building up there, we eventually get to an organism, which can build to a population and community. And we'll discuss all these levels of organization throughout the year, culminating in our ecology lesson at the end, or unit at the end. One thing about the way living things are organized is that form follows function. The function of any part of an organism is related directly to the way it's put together. Whether we're looking at the many branches of a neuron leading towards the connections that we make with each other, the neurons, to pass information, or the highly folded cristae of a mitochondria to increase electron transport, or the hollow bones that a lot of birds have for flight. All of these are related to their function. Third big one, living systems store, retrieve, transmit, and respond to information essential to life processes. In other words, it's all about DNA. Carrying the genetic code is the main function of deoxyribonucleic acid, and this is maintained from generation to generation. This is life's continuity here, this really stable molecule of nucleotides that carries the information to build proteins and to regulate how much to make. We'll discuss all this when we get to our molecular genetics unit that you can, if you want, take a whole class about. I mean, I also teach MolBio, and this is the fastest growing area of new knowledge in the biological sciences. Genomics and proteomics and studying the genomes and proteins found in living things. This is driving research today. The last point is that biological systems interact, and these systems and their interactions possess complex processes. All life is related to one another, and all life interacts with one another. Within an organism, a living system, you can use negative or positive feedback to amplify the amount of product to make or to control the amount. We'll discuss a lot of this when we get to cell cycle and cell-to-cell communication. When we look at a community, we see how different organisms interact with each other. Here's a good old food web from Living Environment, and the arrows are showing which way the materials and energy are flowing. Clearly, we're top of the food chain here, but that's not always the case. Now, there's one area that I really am not going to discuss too much in class this year. It's not my cup of tea. It's how science and technology interact with society. In other words, the very large umbrella of bioethics. Not so much why things happen or how they happen, but more of how are we able to use this information? What's right and what's wrong with this knowledge? Again, this is not my cup of tea, but you can take personal genetics with Mrs. Wojtowicz. She'll do a really good job going through that with you. The last thing I want to talk about today is a part of the class that whenever we get to it, really is what the class is. Science practices. That is doing science. Making observations that can be tested. time and time again. You know this as the scientific method. We make observations, we question what we see, and then we try to make a prediction. We try to make an educated guess, I hate that saying, to figure out what the answer is. And the only way to find out is to test. If our test does not support the hypothesis, well, we can test again, we can revise our hypothesis, or we can start from scratch. If our test supports the hypothesis, well, we keep furthering our predictions and trying to verify that it indeed is accurate. And this is what science is. And frankly, like Sheldon's going to say, it's a verb, not a noun. So hopefully you're ready to do some science this year. And the labs, when we get to them, are going to be kind of tough. But after all, it's going to help you understand science. Any questions? Please email me, let me know. Otherwise, see you in class.